Oh, well, let's get started.
Absolutely.
Well, welcome to the Unchaining Modern Slavery Webinar for the month of July. It's great to have everyone join us today. Thank you so much for signing up, and I hope that you're able to fill in the pre-webinar poll through SurveyMonkey. That's just to stimulate your minds and get you thinking about today's topic as we enter today. And there's opportunity for people to ask questions, so I just invite you to put those questions in the chat, and we'll attend to those questions at the end. So the idea of the Unchaining Modern Slavery webinars is really to advance the conversation around modern slavery risk. That's not to discredit basic understandings of awareness of modern slavery and the Modern Slavery Act, but the idea is to keep the conversation moving and really to help business leaders to think around the issue of modern slavery from a number of perspectives. My name is Dr. Stephen Morse. I'm the CEO of Unchained Solutions, and we inspire Australian organisations to be leaders in making impact on modern slavery. Today, I have with me Carsten Primdal, who's the Director of Vantage Compliance and Mitigation. Welcome, Carsten.
Thank you, Stephen.
Good to have you here. We'll get to know you a little bit in a minute, but I just want to start with an acknowledgement of country, recognising that people are coming from different places, and just to start our proceedings. So in the spirit of reconciliation, Unchained acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and their connections to the land, sea and community. And we pay our respects to their elders past, present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. So wherever you are meeting today, I'm in Gadigal country, and so we welcome you and trust that that you find today's webinar stimulating around modern slavery. So as I mentioned, please ask questions, put them in the chat, and you may like to check out our Unchaining Modern Slavery business group as well on LinkedIn for more information. So let's get to know our panelist, Carsten. Welcome, Carsten. And it's great to have you join us today. We're going to have a focus specifically on looking at Asian-based supply chains and China, including China, and just to sort of put the address the elephant in the room to begin with. Just put it out there that we're not going to be looking at some of the more current sort of political controversial issues around doing work and working with suppliers in China, especially. We do acknowledge that there's a lot of issues at hand at the moment, but this webinar is not about tackling some of those complex issues that are reoccurring at this time. So I just wanted to put that out there. And also the other elephant in the room is probably, you might hear some children. There's my children in the background. So just want to put that out there as well. So Carsten, it's a pleasure having you here today. Maybe you're best to introduce yourself. If you can just introduce yourself and talk, what do you do?
Thank you, Stephen. And I also want to start by apologizing for potential kids being noisy in the background with homeschooling and lockdown due to COVID-19. We're all in a bit of a difficult situation when it comes to that. I've sent my kids out on a walk, so hopefully they will not come back and ring the doorbell incessantly until I can go down and let them in, which they usually do when they go out. So fingers crossed that'll work all right. So thanks for inviting me to this webinar, Stephen. Today, I really appreciate this opportunity to have this discussion with you. We had some very good discussions before, so it's always good to be able to share this information. I like to share my experience from China and Asia, and now we can share it today with your listeners. So. If I just briefly introduce myself, my name is Carsten Primdal. I work with ESG and sustainability and modern slavery, and I have a focus on the supply chain in China and Asia in particular. I mean, China obviously is such a big sourcing destination that you can't really get around that. But it's not just China. There's plenty of stuff going on elsewhere as well. And there's a diversification going on as well at the moment away from China, because there's a realization that there's might be a bit too much of a reliance on that as a sourcing destination. As you can probably hear from my accent, I'm not originally born and bred in Australia. I'm an Australian citizen now, but I'm originally from Denmark. I worked for many years with trade compliance in Europe. Started out originally in automotive compliance, so basically approval of components and vehicles to be sold into the European Union. That's called homologation. And my journey on sustainability started when I visited a brake pad manufacturer in India, just outside New Delhi, 20 years ago now, this year actually, just over 20 years. And this factory wanted to get their brake pads approved to sell in the aftermarket in the European Union. And in order to do that, because automotive industry is very regulated, they need approvals. And we were one of the accredited laboratories to do that kind of approvals for products. So they had we'd set up a meeting with them to discuss this. So it wasn't social compliance focused, but the first thing that happened when I walked into the factory to discuss with management was that they offer a cup of tea in the nice air-conditioned office rooms and some suites, and very, very friendly and welcoming, etc. And then they offer you to go for a trip of the factory or for a tour of the factory. And usually they have some sort of person who guide you through the factory. And in this case, the guy was I don't know if it was his son or something. They had the same last name, so it could have very well have been his son. He took us for a walkthrough, and I walked into this hall that was dark and sooty, and I had all these people sitting in front of me in a room maybe 100 square meters with grinders, and they were sitting grinding the brake pads so that all the frayed edges, etc., would come off prior to packaging and sending in. And I asked, so given all this soot and it's dark and they had skylights, but they're all sooted over, so what's this material that you're using? It doesn't look safe. And none of the workers were wearing PPE, so none of them were wearing any face masks or anything. They were sitting there bare feet and no gloves, no nothing. And they said, "Oh, this is asbestos." And I'm like, "Whoa, I'm not really sure I want to go into this room here." And then they could sort of see on my face that, that probably wasn't the right answer. And said, but don't worry, we're not going to sell that to Europe. You'll get the asbestos-free version. And then expecting that then I would be released and say, oh, wow, okay, then it's okay, right? These people can just sit in here and sell their lives away for a petty penny. But as long as Europeans don't die, right? Yeah.
Right. Yes.
So said, no, this is definitely something I have to be able to do something about. So that sort of set me off on the journey. And then I went to China a few years later. I went to China to work setting up a capacity building program for factories supplying to a big European supermarket chain, competitor of Aldi, which we have here, but the competitor is called Lidl. So Lidl was my biggest client while working in China, set up their program, and then gained a lot of experience in that. So I was hired in by an organization called Amfori, Business Social Compliance Initiative, to do their trainings in China for factories, etc. So during my time in China, I've been out visiting or doing capacity building at plus 300 factories. The training we've done in hotels reached 2,000 factories, and I estimate that we've sort of delivered pamphlets and brochures to 125,000 factories, factory workers. So it's been a fairly broad reach, you could say. I've seen a few things. I've also seen cases of child labor, both good and bad, so to speak, if there is such a thing as good child labor. But I've seen cases where parents were bringing their kids into factories to help them increase their daily quota, which is not necessarily the same as the worst forms of child labor. So I've helped remediate that. So yeah. That's me. And sorry, I should mention why there's this picture of a book next to me. So this is my latest book, which I call a roadmap to modern slavery compliance and a sustainable supply chain. So that's with focus on the parts overseas, etc. So I wrote that last year.
Great. Well, it's an inspiring story in many ways, and your experience. What I really appreciate what you've just said is that you're approaching this issue from her first-hand experience of exploitation, and you've also highlighted that there's a range of scenarios and situations. So when we think about modern slavery risk and we think about exploitation, there's no one sort of scenario. There's a range. There's a spectrum of abuses, and part of the challenge really of addressing modern slavery risk is also discerning which activities that are going on are not, they may not resonate at all well with our, for want of a better word, Western minds, or from the country that we're coming from. So on the one hand, we have to think through the issues of what is appropriate work, but also through the lens of what is not appropriate. And so you raise obviously people who are exposed to asbestos in the work. That's obviously not appropriate. But then when it comes to child labour, and the Modern Slavery Act in particular talks about extreme forms of child labour. So that can be a very slippery slope, a very vague definition, because there are scenarios where children help their parents in order to increase productivity. I suppose the question is, to what extent is that exploitative, and to what extent does that prevent them from other opportunities for education, for example?
That's right.
What risks? So thank you for raising that. So you obviously you're based in Sydney, and you're working in this space. So can you maybe just tell us, progress in some ways very similar to Unchained, the kind of work that you're doing currently at the moment?
Yeah, sure. Yes. So in a sense, we probably operate the same space, but I think from some areas are slightly different from the perspective. So I've been a little bit in and out of corporate life and trying to build this business on the side. At the moment, I'm working part-time with the Catholic Church. So the Catholic Church have a anti-slavery task force, and they have a network of Catholic business entities that are taking, so to speak, services, or we're staffed to help them with their approach to it, so that they take this pool service approach, where we do it as a, well, not we as a, because that's where I work as a salaried or day rated consultant, but then I also run Vantage Compliance, which is helping other clients, and I help mostly big listed companies with their approach. So obviously, being small compared to the big four, like we are here, it's we have a slightly different price point than the big consultancies, which makes us more competitive on economics, on the economic area, but we're also less likely to give the work away to the latest university intern. Right, so it's actually us who do the work, right? Rather than somebody who's not so or being trained up, right?
Sure.
So yes, I help companies set up their sustainable supply chain processes. I help advise them in terms of what to do when they find stuff in their supply chain. I help them with advice on what they should do when they're sourcing in China. One of my clients at the moment is moving from just having a desk-based risk assessment of their modern slavery risks to actually wanting to look into what's happening in the supply chain in China. And this is a big ASX-listed company, and I worked with them for a number of years, and they call me out when they need something. Okay. Which is quite interesting. So the clients you have are usually the best ones, right? Rather than the ones you don't have yet. So.
Sure. Well, yeah, and that's great. I mean, and you have people working with you, but you're largely working by yourself, so that creates a sense of agility to work closely with clients. And
I pull in people when I need it, and I have a network of people that I know of. And nowadays, it doesn't really matter so much where people are, even. So
no.
I have one former staff member who moved from Sydney to Melbourne, and then I think she's on the way to Sweden now, even.
Okay.
So it's but I expect that we'll continue to have a relationship through that, and I have a network of people who I work with in China as well. So for example, through another contact in Sweden as well, we did a job for the Swedish church, where they needed somebody to go out and assess some factories where they were sourcing Bibles and Swedish flags and other merchandise, and they just wanted to know what was going on. So they didn't want to go for a full-fledged third-party audit. They just wanted somebody that they could trust. And I recommended some people that I know on the ground there that I trust, and they went out and did the assessments for them. So it's I call on the resources when I need them.
Great. Sounds like a great position to be operating in. So let's move then to China. You're a bit of an expert on China. You wrote a book called Red Flag, which I read a couple of years ago, and I was looking for it madly this week, and I couldn't find it on all the boxes that I have. We recently moved, just to put a caveat on that. But yeah, look, maybe if you could just, I mean, obviously we've addressed the elephant in the room, but let's just talk more practically about doing business in China and your experiences. What kind of nuances, what kind of insights can you provide in terms of your work there?
I mean, so obviously China is a completely different culture and compared to ours, but I don't think that there's any specific things that, well, of course there are nuances, and you've got to be careful with how you phrase stuff, and sometimes we come across as being perhaps more direct and rude than what they're used to. I have to say my wife is Chinese, so I've experienced that sort of cultural clash firsthand from time to time at home around the dinner table. So there are things where I might express myself in a way that she doesn't quite get, or she express herself in a way that I don't quite get, and that of course also flows over into business. So I think it's very much a question of being, understanding and having that flexible mind when dealing with your counterparts in China or your partners in China. Having said that, and the elephant in the room at the moment, of course, is that there's a trade war going on. My experience is that trade war is very much on the higher echelons of society. When it actually comes to the nitty-gritty details and moving product in and out, that is not really such a big issue, unless of course you happen to be in one of the industries that are being blocked, then it's a big issue. But when it comes to moving product out that is needed for whatever hospital sector or something that's not subject to additional taxes and tariffs, then it's not really an issue that is considered. But of course, there is a consideration in regard to what happens in the Chinese province of Xinjiang, where there's allegations of labor camps and forced labor. It's an issue that's hard to verify. It's an issue that's hard to overlook. So depending on which side you're on, or which country or which end of the supply chain you're sitting in, you obviously need to demonstrate to a degree that you've done something to understand this. Personally, I think that we need to do our best to understand what's going on, and we obviously need to do our best to make sure that we have the best possible suppliers. And sometimes people can get a little bit complacent when it comes to looking for new suppliers. I mean, we like to deal with the people we know and who have done a good job in the past. But sometimes there's a reason for trying to seek out some additional suppliers, if for nothing else than to be able to actually leverage some influence. So it's it's hard to say what's really going on there, because it's not an area that you can go and do or easily audit, especially not the labor camps. So
sure. Yeah, so that, I suppose that raises the question around what what are the opportunities and challenges for Australian companies who are needing to demonstrate due diligence in mitigating the risk of modern slavery. is that how, how do you see those, where do you see the landscape in that regard as companies, many companies, a report just came out this week around, since a race to the middle on that a lot of companies are dealing with the Modern Slavery Act. A lot of companies that I've spoken to, they're at the precipice of tier one suppliers, still trying to work out how to make sense of the supply chain at that level. So going further afield into Southeast Asia, into China, how best do you think companies should be tackling this issue? There's obviously traditional methodology around SAQs. How successful would an SAQ be for a supplier in China, for example? What are some of the ways do you think that companies
definitely can't stop at the SAQ when it comes to dealing with a supplier that's in tier 2, tier 3, or even further down? That's impossible. I think an SAQ is valid when it comes for a tier 1 supplier, because it'll indicate something about what they're doing further down there in their supply chain, which of course is part of your supply chain as well. But once you go beyond that, you can't. And there has been a bit of a tendency in Australia to think that, okay, what we need to do is we need to get them to fill out an SAQ and sign some sort of statement saying that we do not use forced labor. And then everything is dandy, and we don't need to do anything more because we got our bags clear and now the responsibility has been cascaded and that's it. But that's not how it works. I think if something pops up, then for sure the responsibility will end up sitting with the brand who's buying the products in any case. Right? It's at the end of the day, the damage is done there when it comes to the consumers. So there's pros and cons of all the different approaches. I think, of course, you need to have the SAQ. It's a natural first step. It'll help you develop some hypothesis on where the risk is, because at the end of the day, nobody or hardly anybody can do the entire or can audit the entire supply chain. It's too expensive. It's too resource demanding. It's not feasible from a business perspective to do everything. So we got to have some sort of tool that can help us narrow it down so that we focus the energy where it really matters. And what I've seen is that a lot of big corporates, they apply a lens of what is our biggest spend and what do we think is the risk, and then they have some sort of a list where they assess based on country risk, or they find the global slavery index and they use that as an indicator for where to look. But that might be a good approach to start with, but once you get a little bit more sophisticated on, I think you need more than that. Spend alone is not an indicator of risk. Actually, on the contrary, I would say if you're dealing with a very large supplier, chances are that they already have very good processes in place to manage these things, to govern their processes. It's actually once you get down to the smaller suppliers that the risk is bigger, because they don't always have enough manpower to handle these risks. So the SAQ will help you direct your resources in a particular direction. But the next step, I think, is, and again, it depends on how big your organization is, etc. But starting with something like SEDEX, which is a supply ethical data exchange, and is a member organization where designed to avoid duplication of efforts when it comes to risk assessment and audits. I think that's a really good starting point, because it alleviates you of the burden of having to go out and do your own lists of country risks, etc., and keeping them up to date constantly, because SEDEX does that, and that's part of the subscription or the membership fee, that you have access to that, so you know that you're always up to date, rather than sitting with a 5-year-old list that doesn't even take into account that Syria has had a civil war for years and years, right?
Yes.
You got to have up-to-date information if you want to manage this risk, and then you got to diversify over different factors. But again, it's not about getting a perfect SAQ process that will allow you to capture 100% of the high risk and that all the low risk suppliers be filtered out. It's about developing some sort of a hypothesis of where is your risk, and then figure out what do we look for first, and what do we look for second, etc. So if you have a process that allow you to do that, then the next step is to engage with that supplier, and that could be either having somebody go there, it could be having somebody on the ground in China, if it's in China we're talking about, or somebody on the ground in Bangladesh or India, etc. Who you trust, who can then go and talk to them and perhaps do a preliminary audit or assessment of them. And then of course you also need to verify. So that's where the third-party auditor comes into play. And along the way, you have to triangulate all the different information that you're receiving, because one thing is that you see a management system being documented, but do you actually see any evidence of it being applied? Have you done worker interviews to check that they're receiving proper payment, that their documents are not being withheld, that they're not forced to stay for some reason, for example, being paid the salary only once a year? Just before Chinese New Year. So there's lots of different factors that plays into it. You can't just use one factor as the ultimate sign of a particular risk. So I think, in short, there's a lot of factors at play, but it's that's sort of looking out, right? And I think it's very easy to just blame the factory for the situation. And surely they're in this game to make money, so you can't blame them for wanting to make a profit and a living out of what they do. So it's also about looking a little bit inwards, and while it might be naive to say, are you actually paying them enough for the product? Are you allowing them enough to have the margin that they need to have to make this a feasible business? This is just some examples, right? Another example could be if you, for example, are manufacturing clothes. Clothes have a notorious cycles for fashion, etc., and at very short lead times. So if you are providing your supplier with some drawings or the models, but you haven't finalized the design, and then all of a sudden you decide to change we don't want zippers anymore, we want buttons, and you do that 2 weeks before the order is about to go out the door, guess what's going to happen? You're going to have overtime, right? So I mean, are you actually contributing to the problem yourself? So it's not just about blaming and pointing fingers, it's about working with suppliers and working with everybody, making sure that this is done in the right way.
Sure. No, and you've raised some good points, and it's something that we've talked about before. Through these webinars is around, well, what are we doing internally to exacerbate the problem, and that the issue of fast fashion is definitely on the agenda. How do we? What are the demands that we're putting in? I suppose when it comes to the relationship building, and I sense that's a big part of it. How do we create the collaboration? Maybe what are some of the roles around providing incentives, if that's appropriate, and what would be appropriate incentives? And also just in the sense of also be good to get your comments on how, this rather than having sort of a hierarchical structure when it comes to supplier to buyer, like how do we create a system where, it's more, there's more of a mutual kind of respect and a mutual value put on both parties, and probably also recognizing to some extent, the buying power of Australia is smaller than in other countries. So it'd be good to get your comments on that, of just around, how do we sort of work the relationship rather than the blame game.
Yeah, I think incentives is a large part of it, and from what I've seen in China, working with factories there, the incentive, that the only incentive that they often had was this audit report needs to come out clean, because otherwise we can't ship the order. And when you're walking into a factory where everywhere is stacked up with boxes, so that the fire escapes is basically blocked because they don't have enough warehouse space, and they're waiting for a customer to take the order, and you see what that means to them and how it impacts their general productivity, etc. I mean, because they might have other orders that are sitting there and they just don't have anywhere to put it. That's the wrong type of incentive to be giving to people, because it basically drives some of the things underground. And when I'm talking about this, I'm not just talking about slavery, right? Because I see slavery is obviously the worst of the situations. It's not it's not sort of all the indicators leading up to slavery is coming before that. Yeah, you need the right incentives to do that, to drive the change that you want. And whether that means some sort of afterpay of additional or withholding part of the payment for a later period, or offering some sort of a bonus, or offering something for workers. There's many ways to go about it. So one of the ways that we worked for a number of years with some factories was, we actually went out and we asked the workers, what do they want? Because, sorry, I need to take a step back.
Mm-hmm.
In China, workers they come at a premium, right? So worker exploitation is probably not as prevalent anymore as it used to be. Although with COVID now, there's been some changes on the ground, but workers in factories they've been really prized assets for businesses. So you'd actually quite often walk into a factory and you'd see a whole floor that's empty, no people there. And you have all the machinery just standing there idle, and you think, what happened here? And said, well, the supervisor, the line manager for this floor got approached by the factory down the street, and they offered an increase and an increase to all the workers. So he took 25 workers with him and went to the other factory. So there's that price pressure on things, right? Which makes it, that's a good thing, because that means workers are more in control. But actually going in there with a Western mind and just saying, we think you would like this, is probably the wrong approach. It's a lot better to go and say, what do the workers actually want? And just as an example, we were working with a factory in the south of China that was making those rubber floor mats for the bathroom, right? So anti-slip mats. They had a canteen, and it was the most disgusting canteen I've ever seen. There was rats running around on the floor. Just walking through the canteen, I counted like 10 or 12 rats running around. It's like, oh, there's something seriously wrong here. And then in the middle of the canteen, they say, so workers, they pay for the food, right, and that they get in the worker canteen. But the rice was free. So they had this huge vat of rice that they'd placed in the middle of the room, and workers could just go up and take whatever rice they wanted. But it was placed right under the flycatcher. So whenever there was a fly flying into the UV light, one of those sapper things, it would drop into the rice. Yeah. And I was to asking the workers, what would you like to change here? What would make you stay? What would make you come back after next year? And basically they said they would like better food. So I can understand that. I can really understand that. So we helped them with a process to improve the kitchen facilities, and instead of having the rice straight under the flycatcher, we moved it. Say, why don't you just move it 2 meters so the flies, they fall on the floor rather than the rice. It's just one of those little things, right? It's not always that you have to spend millions and millions of dollars on something. It's sometimes just a matter of having a little bit of thoughtfulness.
I think that can apply to a lot of situations of international development that I've witnessed. Is there is sometimes we can have a mindset where we think we need to fix everything, but actually there's the capacity of others who we might think, oh, they don't have the means to do X, Y, Z. Actually, they do, and much better than we do. So I think you're right. I think there's a lot more that can be done to actually ask questions and take the time. And I think that's probably comes back to the challenge of the modern slavery legislation, is that as companies, have various approaches to addressing this. In my experience, I've seen everything from from complete indifference to, doing whatever it takes and everything in between, is to actually, really just start the conversation, really, and particularly around, what to do with modern slavery risk. Is to one of the ways of mitigating risk is to really just start asking questions about, what is it that you are looking for? What would actually make your life better? What would make our working relationship much better in all this? That's great.
Exactly.
Okay, I just want to just pause there and just sort of open it up to see if anyone has any questions. Just at this point, we're at the 40-minute mark. Let me just see if anything's coming through. Just see if it's coming. Got a couple of screens open here. All right. There's a question here about the social audit. How is it commonly used today? How can we tell whether a company has conducted it or not? That's one of the questions.
Well, if a company has conducted a social audit, there should be an audit report. So that obviously depends on whether it's an internal audit or whether it's a third-party audit. It'll have a different format. So, for example, if you're doing a Amphora BSCI audit, it has one format. And if you are doing a SEDEX Meta audit, it has a different format. But at the end of the day, they're looking for very much a similar type of things, like validating that the records have been correct, that the working time is properly recorded, that the safety records are kept, etc., etc. So the first thing you'd look for is whether there's an audit report somewhere. So if you're a member of SEDEX, you can usually look it up there, or you might be able to contact the factory and ask if they have something they can share with you. Whether it's been done or what's the appropriate way of doing it nowadays, well, there's a bit of difference between now and pre-COVID. So now there's a new format, which is like a virtual audit, where they basically do it via Zoom, etc. And that's not quite as good as the on-the-ground audit, but there's obviously a lot of issues with the traveling nowadays and having to take COVID tests and isolating and all that. So it makes it really hard to do audits now. But I think it'll return back to the situation it was before. So audits is a specialized skill. It used to be a bit of a cowboy land out there before, but after the likes of APSCA, which is the Association of Professional Audits or Compliance Auditors, was established, they cleaned it up, or to an extent they might still be in the process of cleaning it up, but there's been a lot of things that have happened. So it's basically an accreditation of auditors. So you need to be accredited to do that. And if you have one of those auditors, you should be, more certain than if you just send out somebody who's, say, if you have a sourcing office in China, for example, you typically have merchandisers who go out and check that the quality is okay. And if you just tag it onto the person who is a specialist in quality to also check for social issues, there's a likeliness that the person will focus on his main job, which is quality, and not so much on the social side of things.
Okay.
So that's not to say that it can't be done, but it's a specialist skill set, and you can only have so many tasks piled onto the same person, right? So I'd say social audit should essentially be standalone activity.
Okay.
And then you have to go. And the protocols say that you have to have a certain amount of person days on site. So this is defined by the likes of SEDEX and BSCI and whatever else you have. Say for a factory of X number of employees, you have to spend this number of days on site, and you have to interview this number of, or this proportion of the worker population. And so they have like a matrix where you can go in and read out saying this is sort of how long time it takes. So for SEDEX, for example, the factory is over 5,000 employees. The length is minimum 4.5 days. So that could be either, say, 5 people going out to a factory for just under 4 days each, or it could be 3 people going out and 2 of them staying for another day. So it depends.
Okay, great. Okay, just another question here. Is Australia ahead of other nations when it comes to the Modern Slavery Act?
In terms of the act itself, I think Australia is definitely sort of leading the pack when it comes to comparison to the UK. Well, we're not leading the pack compared to the UK, but we're in sort of the same league as the UK, the California Transparency and Supply Chain Act. But there's still a fairly big gap between having an act and actually doing what is required to eliminate modern slavery, right? So if like you're referring to the Australian Council of Superannuation Investors before, that came out saying that, or the AFR said that there was a race to the middle. And if that is the approach that the act is driving, then that is not necessarily a good indicator of whether Australia's ahead or not. Look, Australia has been a bit late in the take-up of doing social audits in the likes of China. The US and European businesses have been doing this for well over 20 years. Australian businesses only just starting on that, or have started in the last couple of years. So there's an opportunity to learn from what has happened overseas, of course. But on that aspect, no, Australia is not ahead as it stands right now. But of course, most Australian businesses would hire in companies like Bureau Veritas or SGS, etc., to do these audits, and they would have experienced auditors who one day they do an audit for Walmart, the next day they do an audit for Lidl, the next day they do an audit for Woolworths. So in that sense, that they actually benefit from that experience. So I think it depends on sort of what you see as being ahead, right? Is if you talk about legal framework, then Australia is ahead. But if you talk about actual action on the ground, then I think perhaps not so much. And if I just may add as well, that there was just recently the TIP report, the Transporting in Persons report from the US Department of Labor came out, called it the TIP report, and it classifies countries into tiers in terms of what they're doing to eradicate trafficking. And Australia came in the tier 1, along with a lot of other countries, some of them like the Philippines, Namibia was in tier 1, Denmark was in tier 2. And I'm starting to think
Spain, right? Spain was probably tier 1. I haven't actually looked at it thoroughly, but I'm sure Spain was as well.
And you start thinking, how's this possible? How is this possible? I mean, Philippines have massive human rights issues. How is it possible that they sit in tier 1 and a country, my home country, sits in tier 2, where we have well, maybe there's not a legal framework as such, but it's a crime and they do something about it. So it's like, it's all a matter of the perspective. The Modern Slavery Act in Australia didn't make slavery illegal, right? It was illegal well before that. So it's like, it's not really new, right?
No, it's not
and the same
new,
thing
no.
overseas.
Yeah. Well, I mean, having lived and worked in Spain and studied things over there, I mean, Spain, you know, some of these countries, they're very good at ticking boxes and signing every international bilateral agreement possible, which puts them in a certain category. But you know, 20% of GDP in Spain is the irregular economy, and there's all sorts of activity that goes on around the exploitation of people. So
I've also lived in Spain, and I totally concur. It's there's really a lot of black money circulating around there. That's for sure.
Sure. Okay. Well, thank you. We might wrap up in a minute, but before we do, just to give you a plug for your books. Now, where's my little cursor gone? There we go.
Oh, yes.
So let me bring that up. So you're a bit of a writer, and I see you've actually got a tremendous amount of followers on LinkedIn. How did you arrive at that?
That's a very good question.
So 150,000 followers on LinkedIn.
Yes, that's right. It happened. I mean, yes, I like to write, and I've written 2 books, and I used to blog a lot as well. So due to my blogging activities, LinkedIn realized that I was sharing a lot of content, so they offered to promote me
All right.
to people on LinkedIn, and that led to an enormous amount of followers signing up. I kind of realized that it's not really the proportion of followers hasn't really eventuated in customers for me. So I stopped posting my blogs. I thought this is I got to apply my time where it's more valued. So I'm not really gathering additional followers at this stage, and LinkedIn I don't think is promoting me anymore. Although last time I looked, I think it's about 146,000, but it's not. I'm not that much into these kind of vanity metrics. It doesn't really mean a lot. But yeah, I mean, for people who don't know, it's an impressive number. So, but yeah,
well, it looks impressive. I thought, wow, how did you get 150,000 followers? It's like, oh, this is curiosity.
No, it's more than some of the big consultancies. Yeah, so exactly. Thanks for the plug. If anybody's interested in my book, I'll be happy to sign a copy for you. Special offer for $20, and you can probably get it on Amazon as well. I'm not sure whether the price is a little bit similar, but or maybe a little bit less. I didn't check since I think this one through to you. But on Amazon, you don't get it signed, and you don't get the opportunity to call me either. So
there was another page, I think, too.
So that's it.
That's the page. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. All right.
That's that one there. Do you put that in the show notes afterwards, or?
Yes, I can certainly send that information out to all the viewers. Yeah, following this time together. Great. There's also I've got information if people want to get in contact with either. Oops, sorry, I'm just multitasking here. Carsten or myself. So yeah, if you want to be in touch, you can connect with us either through our social channels or our email or website, and then you can also be in contact with Carsten yourself if you'd like more information about what he's doing or order more copies of his book. So great. Well, thank you so much, Carsten, for joining us today. It's been an interesting journey looking, considering Asian markets, in particular, China. Thank you so much for your insights. And I hope it's been helpful for our viewers today, just to understand a little bit more of what it will take to go beyond, to advance their progress, particularly with the modern slavery piece, and what they need to consider as they move forward. Great.
That's what it matters. Yeah. We need to drive this malpractice out of existence.
Absolutely. Great. Well, thank you so much for everyone for joining us today, and thank you, Carsten, for your time as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, everybody.
Have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.